All right. Good afternoon, Facebook friends and family, and thank you for joining us this afternoon. My name is Chris Lambert. I'm the founder and CEO of Life Remodeled. For those of you who are not familiar with Life Remodeled, we exist to bridge people across divides to help transform each other's lives. We do that by revitalizing neighborhoods in Detroit. Today, I am excited to hear the perspectives of our very esteemed guests. So please join me in welcoming Reverend Dr. Sabrina Black, who is the clinical director of Abundant Life Counseling Center in Detroit. She served on several video-based training projects, including topics on race and reconciliation, grief and loss, and domestic violence. Dr. Black is the president of the National Biblical Counselors Association, and she's authored more than 10 books and workbooks, including Live Right Now. Dr. Tim Hogan is an author, speaker, psychologist, and certified Imago relationship therapist who co-authored the book, How to Find the Help You Need, which is a guide to psychotherapy and spiritual direction. Dr. Hogan teaches at Sacred Heart Major Seminary, and he works in private practice in Plymouth, Michigan. So welcome, Dr. Black and Dr. Hogan, to today's episode on grieving.
Good to be here with you, Chris and Tim.
Yeah, absolutely. What a treat.
Okay, so I'm just going to come right out and say it. I suck at grieving, and I know it. I'm a highly driven social entrepreneur, and often when I face intense crises in my life, my default response is to immediately assign meaning, and then go into problem-solving mode. So I often short-circuit the incredibly important process of sitting in and with brokenness. Dr. Black, we're going to start with you.
Okay.
What is grieving, and what is a healthy grieving process?
All right. So, Chris, let me tell you, grieving is probably what you don't do, because grieving requires that you sit with your emotions. And so grieving is that personal experience that you have. It's what you're going through. It's what you're thinking. It's what you're feeling. It's the psychological and the physiological expression of your experience personally. So it's your sadness. It's your sorrow, it's your stomach ache, it's your backache, it's your personal experience. That's grief. It's the feeling of separation from something that has meaning to you or something that was important to you. So that can be a person, a place, or a thing, but it's when you separated from that, that's the absence of, that's grief. Now, when we talk about mourning, people often get that confused, but mourning is the outward expression of it. It's how we show other people that we are grieving. So we have to be still long enough. And if you're a social entrepreneur, and I understand that being busy and having a lot to do, you just keep moving and keep going and keep going.
All right, Dr. Hogan, do you see grieving the same way and the process the same way?
Absolutely. Yeah. And it's, I think we all are familiar with Elizabeth Kubler-Ross. And, I think people used to think, well, someone dies and you get sad and that's what it looks like and you express it and you mourn. And she said, no, actually, it's more complicated than that. Right. And I know Dr. Black and I would see this a lot. You go through, a lot of times grieving looks really wild, right? Like some days you're like, I'm fine. God has delivered me. Everything's great. And then you wake up the next morning and you're like, I'm not going to work. I'm not doing anything. This is like devastating. So I think grief, if you're not ready for it, can be confusing. So all those feelings that Dr. Black was talking about, that, some days you sit there and it's confusing or you're ambivalent, or, a lot of times as we sit with clients who just lost someone very close to them, they have a whole mixture of feelings. Some of them very dark and painful about separation. Some of them a little bit of a relief because it wasn't all roses. So I think it's yes. And I think it can leave people feeling a little crazy, which is a good reason why we don't do it. Right. I mean, who wants to sit down and look at all the chaos and name the different feelings? I feel a little sad. I feel a little restless. I feel a little numb. I feel like I'm craving whatever, like alcohol, or I'm craving sweets or whatever. Like, who wants to feel all that, right? So
yeah. And sometimes, Chris, we feel like we're too busy to grieve. Just like you were saying, being a social entrepreneur, you just got a lot going on, and you can feel like you just don't have time for that. I even told my prayer partner this week, I got too many clients to see. I got too much to do. I don't have time to stop and grieve all these losses. But the truth is, if we don't deal with our own emotions, if we don't take care of ourselves, we can't take care of anybody else. And so grieving is very important. So grieve, Chris. I'm imploring you.
That's right.
I'm going to, and I'm listening. So you talk about time. All right. I don't know if you guys have heard, but there's this pandemic going on. and
Mm.
it's affecting all of our lives. And time, it seems, is one thing that some people seem to have more of these days. Some have less. But Dr. Black, we'll start with you. Do you think that grieving and grieving well
Hmm.
is harder or easier during this stay-at-home order?
I think that grieving well is critical, but I don't know that the pandemic is helping us to grieve well, only because there's multiple losses. And so people are grieving their work, even if they didn't like their job. They're grieving not having a place to go. They're grieving the stay-at-home order, the fact that they don't have their mobility. They're grieving the loss of money. They're grieving the loss of their family and friends. They're grieving physical connection and just that touch and a hug from somebody. So there are multiple levels of grief. So that time we have a lot of time, but who wants to keep grieving and grieving and grieving and grieving and grieving? And so we grieve maybe one thing, but then we just stop and say, you know what, I'm gonna grieve later. And so yes, it's important to grieve well. And I want to let Dr. Tim jump in before I talk about grieving well, but I think that the time helps, but it's too much time and too many losses. What do you think, Tim?
Yeah, no, I'm with you. I also think that, you know, if you, I was just talking with Chris about a common friend that we have who is losing their dog this week. And, you know, we've done that. I think a lot of you have done that. And that is going to be a very acute focused, right? Like you could sit down, you could say, what are we going to miss about her? You could write it down. You could, you know, find ways to memorialize. But the losses that we're going through, I don't know what your experience, my experience is, there's like the obvious things that we're losing. You know, there's certainly financial impact, and there's a loss of significant events for my kids with graduations from school, and, you know, missing really important events in their life that they've looked forward to for years. Those we can name and talk about and feel and notice. Man, I feel sad. I feel heavy. I feel robbed. I feel angry, like all that, which is all an important part of grief. But then I don't know. And if you guys feel this, I feel sometimes like there's this thing where it's like something's just not right. Like there are these losses. And I think it's an amalgam of things like I have you know, a lot of small business entrepreneurs around here, and so like I'll go to the little taqueria or the little place for you know, a little coffee, and I know all these people because we all kind of are in the same neighborhood, and I haven't seen them now in a few months, and I don't think of it, but, you know, I go to leave my office, it's like, oh wait, they're not there. So you know what I mean? I think there are these things that we don't realize we're losing. You know, we don't realize I'm missing not seeing my mom in person. Zoom isn't quite the same. And then also I would add, there's also this anticipatory grief, right? Like my daughter was supposed to get married this summer, and we're going to lose probably a chunk of money on that. We're going to lose a chance to see all these wonderful people. We've already missed one family wedding. So, you know, don't you think there's a lot of specific things we're grieving that we could put a finger on, but then there's also, this is almost like a season of and vicarious grief for the people I know that have lost family members and all that. So does that?
Okay, so you both have pointed out a lot of areas where there's grief, and I think you would agree with this statement. I believe almost everyone in America right now is experiencing loss, and therefore almost everyone is grieving, whether they know it or not.
Yes.
I would guesstimate most people like myself are not grieving well. So you've already heard about how I struggle. What would you say are some of the dangers for people who struggle to engage in the entire process? And we're going to talk later about people who get stuck on certain areas of the process, but what are some of the dangers for short-circuiting the process or being unwilling to go through the process?
Well, one of the things when you talk about short-circuiting the process or kind of restraining your grief and trying not to feel it is that when you shut off your emotions, you do just that. So you don't feel pain, but you also don't feel pleasure. You know, when you don't feel grief, you also don't feel joy. And so you just become numb to feeling altogether. And so the other thing about trying to repress that is that you can only push it down so long. And with all the grief that's mounting and mounting and mounting, at some point it's just going to explode. And so you will find yourself grieving in the most unlikely situations and circumstances because you've been trying to hold it for so long. And you cannot contain grief. It will express itself at some point.
And I assume when it explodes, people around you aren't saying, oh, that person's just grieving right now.
They're going to
not always how I feel
at that point.
That's right.
You know, people, go ahead, Tim.
Well, I mean, don't you also, I also think there's a way that we kind of leak it. You know, if I'm not fully aware, I mean, this is a nervous system event for us, you know, and if our limbic system is kind of simmering always with this ungrieved sadness or anger or feeling disappointed or and I'm not finding a way to name it, to feel it, to pray with it, to, you know, go for a walk and let the energy kind of swirl and get digested, then the people who are closest to me are they're gonna feel this bad vibe. You know, they're gonna feel like an agitation or my impatience, because you're right. I mean, there's only so much energy in the system, and we believe this lie that it makes more sense to not feel it, to push it down, when actually that uses up our energy. If we just kind of look it in the eye, right, and let ourselves feel it. I think that then we can be freed. We can release the pain and realize we're all in this together. We're all grieving and mourning together. So
I have
another challenge, Chris, in terms of delaying the grief, is that people, for whatever reason, have this timetable that they think you grieve for 3 months for this kind of loss, you grieve for a year for this type of loss. And if you're now 2 years later just expressing the grief, people are going to kind of go, well, why are you still crying over that? That was 2 years ago. Not realizing that you have had so many losses in the last 2 years. There are a lot of things that you're going to be grieving for an extended period of time.
Okay, you brought up crying, so let's talk about crying. I have a good friend named Jason Wilson who wrote a book called Cry Like a Man.
Mm-hmm.
This book has blown up. It was an Amazon bestseller. So Jason's convinced me that crying is not only important, but actually stress hormones are secreted through the tear duct glands.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's an important stress relief. And honestly, I'm going to be honest with you both. Not that I've been lying any other time in this interview. But
we're waiting for this big turn.
Yeah.
Let's get honest.
I haven't cried in a very long time. And I've experienced a whole lot of things in the last 45 days that have given me plenty of reason to cry. So how do you help someone like me who can't get it to flow?
Yeah. You know, one of the first things that come to mind is the word of God, you know, and Psalms, I think it's like Psalms 107, when it says, and then they cried unto the Lord, and he delivered them from their distresses. You know, and so we can have so many things going on that are distressing us and causing us to be overwhelmed. But if you go cry into the Lord, you know, sometimes we don't want other people to see us cry or to know the level of sadness or sorrow we're experiencing. But start with crying to God, because once you at least get those tears out, you'll discover that crying gives great relief. I mean, I tell somebody, go have yourself a good cry, and not just a good cry, but an ugly cry. One of those cries where you go, and you're snotting on your arm and your makeup is running, and it's like, you need one of those. A man needs it, a woman needs it, but you got to just get a good cry out. And so sometimes it's in the presence of the Lord, where you know you're not being judged, where you know nobody's going to condemn you, where you can feel that sense of freedom, where you really can just go cry out to God, I'm hurt. God, I'm disappointed. God, I'm sad. Lord, I'm going to miss them. Father, what am I going to do? Lord, help me. But just to cry out to God is a place to start. And then after that, get yourself some good movies. You know, there's just some sad movies, you know, and sometimes it's easier to cry for their problem than it is to cry for my problem. But while I'm crying, you done that?
I found that to be true. And sometimes that concerns me. Why can I cry in a movie, but I can't cry in real life? Dr. Hogan, so often society tells us that that's more of a feminine thing to cry. Do you cry?
I do, but I didn't always cry. It actually took some work, because somewhere along the line, and actually I could point back to it, but we don't have time now, I made a decision I wasn't going to cry anymore because of all the grief I got. Because I was raised, I had 6 older sisters and no brothers. So I grew up in a house, I'd cry all I want. Like, I was wonderfully alive in my emotions. And then I just started getting shamed, because I was also an athlete. So I playing college football, you know, you just can't cry when you're having a bad day. Turns out men don't put their arm around you and say, it's going to be okay, brother. They kind of mock you and call you bad names. So I shut it down. And then I honestly think, and I would say everything Sabrina was saying, absolutely. And what your friend in the book, I forgot his name, but I know one of his points of his book, because I have it sitting on my shelf, is you got to give yourself permission. I think that's what you're saying. Give yourself permission. I say too, I think that's true for a lot of people, Chris. A lot of people have a lot of uncried tears because of all the pressure we're on in this world, especially as men, but even women. I began praying for tears. I began praying that God would give me tears to release this so that I could be fully alive and present for people. And I think that is a prayer God answers. And then, like the movie thing, then the next thing is, then how do you jumpstart tears? I think movies are great. I think too, you can, you can do things with your breath. that can really stimulate where our tears are held. And so sometimes just some very deep, long breaths when you're sitting down so you don't pass out. And sometimes just really breathing into it, you'll notice stuff will start coming up. And when it does, you have to stay with the breath. Don't slow down to analyze. Stay with it because your body wants to release it. It's almost like working the pump in and out. Also, you can, one more, Chris, one more thing. You want another one, Chris? Okay. Yeah. And this is one to do when you're alone, not when your kids are there, because this will freak them out. But you can, I will sometimes take a big deep breath and circle my arms overhead when I'm standing up and then just go, only like really loud. And when I get to the end, like fake cry, I go, and sometimes it starts and it finds those tears and the tears just start coming. And it's really cool. I do that every morning before I start praying just to see what's there.
I'm going to honestly do that. I thank you both for that. Let's talk about the 6 stages of grief. You already brought up Kubler-Ross, who introduced the world formally to the 5 stages of grief. One of our co-authors, David Kessler, added a 6th stage of meaning. So the stages that are often talked about are denial, anger, bargaining, depression, acceptance, and then meaning. And of course, both of them would say it's not a linear process. I know you would say that as well. And we can go to different stages at different times. But where are you seeing people right now during COVID-19 spinning their wheels and getting caught on one of those stages? Dr. Black, what are you seeing?
Well, the first thing I'm seeing, Chris, is that people are stuck in shock and denial. I mean, they're really still at stage 1 because what I hear people saying is not so-and-so. It couldn't have happened to so-and-so, but they were healthy, but they were young. And so it's this sense of it can't really be, or they'll see it posted online because, everybody's getting their pictures posted and saying, my friend died, this person died. And you see it and go, I'm not gonna look at that right now. And you scroll right past that because it couldn't be that person. I've even had that experience myself where, I'll see a text from somebody saying so-and-so died, and they're not even using terms now like, they passed, they've transitioned, they've made their peace, they're gone on with the Lord, they're dead, they've died. And it sounds so harsh. It's kind of like, oh my God, no. And so what I'm finding is that people are stuck right there because, again, when they hear this one died, just as they're trying to get in touch with that, now somebody else has died or something else is lost. So that's the first place I'm seeing people get stuck. But the second place people are getting stuck is in depression. People are bottoming out. They're just sinking. It's like the weight of it. And that's what depression is. It's being pressed down from too many things happening in your life. And so people are just falling under the weight. It's almost like it's too much to bear. And I just want to remind people is that God will not give you more than you can bear. And he will also send people alongside you to help you bear up under it. And so even though you feel like you're bottoming out, there is still hope, there is still help, and healing is available for what you're dealing with.
Dr. Hogan, what do you see?
Yeah, no, that was really well said. And I wouldn't add that much more, although it gives me compassion. It's interesting. I was just talking to my friend who's up north and was saying, up there, there aren't as many people. And so he said, people up here, Tim, are in total denial that this is a real thing. I have a daughter who works in a hospital in Chicago, and we talked to her at the end of the day, and they used to have one ICU unit and then an overflow where she works. She's a nurse. They now have 6 units filled with COVID patients and a 7th for non-COVID ICU patients. I mean, she's never been through something like this before, like people walking into a room to care for someone and having them having passed away. And that never happens in this hospital. There's always someone at your side when you die. I mean, she, taking the phone and putting up to people's ears so their loved ones can talk to them as they're getting ready to die. Like this has been her everyday life now for 2 months. And so for her, she hears stories that people think this isn't a big deal. Come on, let's get things going again. And she's broken by it. I mean, she's crying. She's our joy bringer in our house. She's always finding a positive. And now we Zoom with her, FaceTime with her, and you look at her face and she's just deep. She's just broken. She's never had to use body bags before this. There was always someone else. And now she's got to help out when these patients die. So many patients die, 3 on a unit or 3 in a day sometimes on her unit. So you're right. I think different people are in denial. People are in denial. It's kind of not their fault. They just can't fathom it. Like you were saying, Sabrina, you just can't fathom this to be real. So people get stuck in that. It's like, come on, let's get back to work.
I really appreciate that perspective, because honestly, the perspective of the grieving process has helped me to have compassion for people who are in denial, because this is such a political argument now. It's a hoax or this or that. And I'm just beginning to understand, well, this is just a person in denial. And I want to have compassion and empathy for them rather than judgment. So I do want to shift the conversation a little bit toward politics and anger. So anger is a place I'm seeing a lot of people spinning their wheels, and I want to hear your thoughts on this. I want to give a little context. I'll give a preface that Life Remodeled works with everybody from left, right, middle, you name it. I personally did not vote for Donald Trump for president in 2016, and I won't be voting for him this year. But I have a number of friends who are just sending me article after article after article negative on Trump over. It's like that's all they think about all the time. I have other friends. I have a friend in particular who did a video on Governor Whitmer. Okay. And I mean, this friend was so angry about not having access to seeds and paint. I honestly sat back and I watched this video and I felt sorry for this person, because this person looked scary. Okay. Like the anger was just like, it was rage. Is that people getting stuck in the grieving process? What's going on there? Or people showing up with AK-47s at the assault rifles
I'll tell you,
at the Capitol building?
I think that this perspective of grief is really helpful, because, you know, you flip on the TV, and I actually happen to have people in my very own family, like not my home because they wouldn't be allowed to sleep there, but people in the extended family who are very different than me and are angry, and so as I hear people defend what we've gotten from leadership, which is just a whole workshop on how to be angry and non-relational. I mean, I'm just craving someone as a mother, a matriarch or patriarch, to come on and say, we are brothers and sisters. We are in this together. And you know what? Our brothers in China are in it with us too. And we need to deepen our friendship with them and learn all we can from them, because they're 3 months ahead. Like, I'm just dying to hear that. I'm dying to hear us say, don't wait for the government to bail out your independent. I mean, I've been going around buying stuff from people, buying cars. I'm not bragging. I'm just saying, I believe now is the moment, just like, Viktor Frankl says, you get to the concentration camp and you see, holy smokes, there are men walking around with their bread, giving their bread to men who look sicker than them. Like, you can choose to love in any situation. You can choose to lead with love. And I love this frame, Chris, because you get people stuck in anger, and something in our heart just says, oh no, right? Like, that's not what we want as humans. That's not us at our best.
You just dropped a Viktor Frankl reference. I read Man's Search for Meaning about a month ago. And what timing to read that book.
Oh, tell me.
Wow.
If anyone hasn't read that book, read that book. Dr. Black, what are your thoughts about
thank you, Tim, so much for that perspective. Because I definitely appreciate the idea that we should lead with love and not with hate. And all of us can do that from our own homes in terms of showing that love. Anger is indeed part of the grieving process. But the thing is that we walk through the valley of the shadow of death. And so when you're going through the valley, the goal is to go through it, not to get stuck in any particular point. And so we don't want to get stuck in anger, but we also don't want to get stuck in depression. We want to get to the point where we level off and we accept it and we're moving on. And so all this anger that you're seeing, whether it's about the politics or the leaders, I just revert back to what the word of God says, that we don't have to like those in authority, but we have to pray for them. Our responsibility is to pray for our leaders. And so I'm praying not only for the president, but I'm praying for the governors. I'm praying for the mayors. I'm praying for city council. I'm praying for church leaders. I'm praying for business leaders and owners, because we need to pray for those who have responsibilities to lead other people and who have other people's lives in their hand. We know that when the righteous rule, the people rejoice. There is no rejoicing at this point, because there are so many things that we're in despair over, which means we need to be praying for righteous leadership, that God would raise up a righteous seed in this hour, because that's when things are going to change, when the righteous get engaged and get involved. And so, yes, anger is part of the process, but we don't want to be stuck there, and we don't want to be lashing out at other people. We want to take that to God and pray.
Yeah.
All right, let's talk about other practical steps to go through this process. So you mentioned praying, which is a practical step, right? Dr. Hogan, I think I've heard you talk about before how people need to regulate how much time they're watching the news, because there's a lot of polarization going on. What are either one of you? Let's start with Dr. Hogan. Practical thoughts of how to grieve well. You've given us some physiological ideas earlier on, but what else would you add to the table?
Yeah, well, now more than ever, it's a time when we need to be skillful with our nervous system. And it's just not skillful to leave the TV on in the background, because no matter what station you're watching, there's spin on both sides, and neither are cultivating compassion, right? They're both blaming and angry. So in my mind, my question is, how much of the news do we really need to watch? Like every afternoon I check out the numbers, new cases, that I've decided I just need to get the basic data, and then I shut it off. I don't turn on the news anymore at home, because all I need to know is, are we getting any closer to flattening the curve, and can we anticipate what's going to happen this summer? Does that make sense? So I try and not let my brain be stimulated by that. And instead, honestly, I have some of my favorite old motivation books. I put those on my phone now. So the minute I get in my car, I plug my phone in and I get someone talking to me like, you can choose your attitude. You can say, I need that, because I need to bathe my brain in positivity right now, because everywhere else it's scary. So that's how I do it. I just keep bathing my brain in positivity.
So for the person listening right now, and I have some people in my mind, okay, who that's their outlet, the news, they're hooked. And even before COVID-19, they were hooked, but now more than ever. You're saying, fill that time with positivity. And are there any resources you might recommend?
I mean, there's a bunch, and I'll get mocked by my friends for this, but I'm a Tony Robbins fan. I'm a John Ortberg fan. I like good preaching. I like positive, good, psychologically informed motivation, which is what Tony Robbins is, I think. So those are the two that I've been listening to lately. I mean, there's others that I find helpful. But
I just watched on Netflix, because I've been doing a lot of Netflix, including I watched The Tiger King. I'll just throw that out there, okay? Not helpful to the grieving process. Not helpful at all.
You'll need a detox from that.
I'm not naming anything I'm not promoting.
But I watched Tony Robbins' Not Your Guru, and I was in a talk with you with New Canaan Society, Dr. Tim, and you did the thing that activates the limbic system. What is that process, and what does that do?
So yeah, I mean, I what I do is bellows breath. He does a thing called breath of fire, but bellows breath is where you it's just a way of powerfully activating your breathing, so that it initially excites your nervous system and then settles down your autonomic nervous system. So it's like this. If people want to try it at home, you start with your elbows in like this, and you inhale up, and then you pull it down hard, 1 per second. So it looks like this. And you can just go at it, man. You can do that. I do like 15 when I start in my morning time. I do my stretches and then that. And then if I'm still tired, I'll do 15 more. I'll do until my brain wakes up. And so it's both invigorating, but also settling, because our breath is that connection to our deeper emotions. The breath is the one activity that we can either consciously regulate or forget about it, and then our body takes over. So it's a beautiful bridge to our body. So I spend a lot of time learning about breath work, and people who work with me always look forward to a new exercise when they come in, because that's a good way to get grounded so we can access our best self.
I love it. Dr. Black, practical.
Awesome. Yeah, so I'm appreciating that, Tim. I'm a big breather. So I've been doing a series called Mental Health Monday. And almost on every talk, I talk about breathing. I do a basic 4-7-8. Inhale 4, hold 7, exhale 8. Inhale through your nose, exhale through your mouth. So I really appreciate that new one. I'll be incorporating that. But in terms of grieving well, so which was the question. So a couple of things I would also add to that. Definitely breathing, but also get some rest. I got to tell you that grieving is exhausting. It's emotionally draining and it's physically draining. Your body is responding and reacting in ways that you may or may not be aware of. And so it takes a toll on your physical body and your emotions. And so when you feel tired, go take a nap. If you feel tired at the end of the day, go to bed early. There's nothing that says you have to catch the 11 o'clock news. Go to bed. It's going to be the same news tomorrow anyway. So don't stay up too late at night. And if you don't have to go to work at 8, stay in bed a little bit longer. I mean, 9 o'clock is okay. I mean, and I appreciate people who are the early birds who want to get up at 3, 4, 5 o'clock and meet with the Lord and get their day started. But then take a nap midday because you got to be tired at some point. So rest is key. The other thing I would say is give yourself permission. We talked about permission earlier, but permission to feel and permission to say no. You don't have to engage in everything. I got to tell you, I'm about zoomed out at some point. I see my clients on Zoom. I do these Zoom talks. I'm doing the Zoom Mental Health Monday. You don't have to go to every Zoom engagement that somebody is inviting you to. It's like getting an invitation to a party. It's like, oh my God, what am I going to wear to the party today? So, you don't have to keep doing all the Zoom things. Say no to some things. You can say no to your children even. Don't feel guilty because they're at home. You're at home too. So don't feel like you have to do everything. The other thing I would say in terms of grieving well is stay offline. So not only turn the TV off, but sometimes you have to take a social media break because unfortunately, social media has become a lot of bad news. I mean, I'm glad that this is the positive talk that we're doing today, that we're trying to help people process their pain and go through their grieving well. But a lot of it is who's died and who's doing what that you're not measuring up to. And so that comparison that you do when you're online can be depressing. So maybe you need to just take a break sometime from that. But when I was talking about giving yourself permission to feel, you do need to feel the pain. You do need to feel the emptiness. You do need to feel the loneliness. Don't get stuck there, but also don't deny that it hurts when you lose someone. And that's just real talk.
Yeah. Well, and to come back what you were saying before, Sabrina, because if you're willing to do that, I know my experience is you do that good grief work and you get used to being fully present in the present moment, not afraid, not worried about the future, not still mad about what. And all of a sudden I've had these moments where I'm sitting at my table eating my son who's home from college and my wife is there and I just look at them and I just am like, I'm looking at their eyes and I'm noticing the fluctuations of color in their eyes. And it's like, my son has beautiful eyes. Like it's, you know what I mean? There's so much waiting for us in the present moment that if we don't grieve, we can't be in the present moment because that's where our feelings are. But once we start clearing that and digesting that, suddenly we realize that the present moment has everything we need.
That's beautiful. I want to thank you both. You're experts, and that's why I wanted to spend this time with you and invite others who don't know you. You're also friends of mine, and I want to thank you both for your friendship. And so any closing thoughts that you'd like to leave us with? We'll always say ladies first. Dr. Black.
Thank you, guys. I appreciate it. I was really resonating with that present moment. Be present, because I think that's important. I would say just be. I know this is the season where everybody is looking at their to-do list because they got this time at home. Don't feel pressure to have to do anything. This may be a good season to practice just being instead of doing. Be present. Be prayerful. Be engaged with your family, be connected, and be in a space where you can finally get that help you've been needing anyway. Because there were some people who already had some pre-existing conditions who needed counsel and didn't get it. But now with COVID-19 and the coronavirus and the news and all the scares going on, it's been exacerbated and people are now needing more help. And people who've never needed help before, or all of a sudden realize that, oh my God, I need to talk to somebody. Don't suffer in silence. Hope, help, and healing is available. You can look me up on Psychology Today. I know, Chris, you have the information posted for how people can get to my website. Tim is available. And it doesn't just have to be us, but reach out and make the call to somebody. Call your clergy, call a friend. But if it's more than that, call a professional and get some help.
I'm going to post both of your websites below, and I absolutely recommend both of these two great people to anyone seeking additional help. Dr. Tim.
Oh man, that is just so good, because one of the things that this thing has done for a lot of us is it's taken away our false sense of security and self. Like we're not achieving as much as we were. We're not getting as many people smiling and liking us. And so we're stuck at home. And that's part of our grief, is that we no longer are getting the approval and achievement, feeling in control, all that stuff. So I love that. Use the space to let your heart finally come out, to be fully present to your life. And my last thought, I just had to affirm that. I just think that's wonderful, Sabrina. I also think, you think of our favorite movies. All of our favorite movies tend to be movies where the person is pulled out of their familiar story and they're plopped in some unfamiliar place. And we all sit back and say, now, how are they going to do? Now, it's a movie, so we know they're going to be the hero and they're going to kill it, in a good way. I think we're all there. Like we've all been plucked out of our familiar life. And there's a tendency to want to hide under the covers and wait for it to pass. And as I say, when that happens, I grab my phone and I say, Siri, set timer for 20 minutes. And I put my head under the covers and I feel sorry for myself. And then when that timer goes off, I say, now doggone it, time to go. Like we got to go. This is the time for humans to show up and love with more courage than ever, because when things are in flux like this, we can make the biggest difference. And so that'd be my encouragement. Let's not let this opportunity pass to love creatively and love well.
Amen. You both have blessed me personally, and I know you blessed others. In closing, I would say to all who are listening, grieve